I'm intrigued by what we all know and experience. There are times when we know elected officials that are really great at the popularity portion of the job, right? To get the job. And we've seen and all experienced it that there's oftentimes a very different skill set to get the job versus what it takes once you got it to make some of those hard, challenging decisions, right? So flesh it out a little bit.
Well, and one of the problems you have is once you make those hard decisions, they're not always the most popular decisions, but they are, if you're looking out for your community at large and you're trying to have a bigger picture, you're going to make a tough decision, and that's not always the popular thing to do. So the pushback for an elected official in an executive role is always, how do you balance what's popular with what's right?
I would even say that it doesn't matter if it's executive or the legislative, right? I mean,
correct.
And there's plenty of other states where judges are elected that sometimes judicially the decision isn't all that popular, and there's a fervor for, booting somebody out of office. So
it's oftentimes much harder to make the right decision than it is to make the popular decision.
Amen to that.
Oh, amen. And I think that's part of the problem with an executive, going to an executive. Morgan County hasn't done it yet, but that position is a very difficult position to fill because you're answering to 5 elected officials, and the elected officials are struggling to do the right thing over the popular thing, and then you've got 5 different opinions going, and everyone managing one person. That's a difficult role for anyone to sit in.
I would say it doesn't matter if it's at the municipal, special service district, county. I mean, here we are, the session's about to get underway, and I would even say that whether it's 104 legislators and the governor, like that balance is always challenging, right? I think that's kind of what our founders envisioned. Tom, you were going to say something?
Yeah, and you've got diversity. I have a new council I'm working with right now. I've got 2 fellows who've had no government experience, and you can argue that they think they've got a lot of managerial experience, but one guy's got 3 employees and someone else has got a Chamber of Commerce he's working with. And their view of management is quite different than someone who's been in government or been in a large organization somewhere else. You also have the problem of the idea that you want to be a career politician, and that plays all sorts of games with how decisions get made. So
yeah, and sometimes that are you a career politician plays into, do you really, now that you've been in your position for 4 years, do you have more experience and better understanding of exactly what's involved and the history behind it and the vision of where you were going? But that's about the time people are like, oh no, time for a change. It's always better to have a fresh view.
But I think, as I've talked to Ricky Hatch and we've talked about elections, the incumbent always has a 3 to 4% advantage just naturally. So I think that's played out.
I think you could argue the opposite though too, because every time we have judges up for retention votes, you have roughly 20 to 25% that are just going to say no. So I agree that I think incumbency certainly has some sort of favor, unless it's been for all the wrong reasons that their name is recognized, right? But I think that you see that on kind of both sides, that some folks are just going to say, I think it's my duty to purge and to kind of do a refresh, so it's just a nay vote no matter what, if they're an incumbent. And then there's clearly that argument that's age old, right? I have the experience, you've paid to give me this experience, why would you want to pay somebody the same salary you now have through me efficiently to re-educate somebody new, right? So what do you say about the argument that it's always good to get a fresh perspective? Tom, you mentioned diversity.
I do, and I think there's some real advantage to diversity. But running a local campaign, it is so much more about name recognition. In running for the commission, I put up a billboard. It was giant. 75% of our workforce drove past that billboard every day. I wanted to put what I believed in, and the billboard company says, no, you don't. You just want your name up there as big as you can get it, because it's the name that will get you elected, regardless of what you believe, what you've done, or what you might do. It's the black part of politics, that we have relatively uneducated electorate voting for people.
Interesting perspective. That comes back to wanting a greater transparency of everything that we're doing, right? So that, I know that we all truly believe in this principle, but a better informed electorate makes better choices at the ballot box, right? And to your point earlier in the program, Tom, there's this, perspective of sometimes the folks that show up are indeed vocal, but they don't represent as much of the majority as they perceive or will certainly posture. But the challenge for all of us in our roles has been, or do they? And you just don't know.
Let's take the example of Twila Valley Temple. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints wants to put a temple in Twila Valley. They own a parcel of ground that's surrounded by 1-acre residences, and they're intending to put a development in to kind of create an ambience around the temple that they liked. And there was a huge outcry by the immediate 20 neighbors, and the valley was really supportive of the idea, but that vocal minority swung things in ways that never should have happened.
Oh, but then you open the whole can of worms of land use, and by far the most controversial thing you're ever going to do in local government is land use. And so that can swing an election really, really quickly. And it's always fascinating to me that those who are opposed to development because they want this overall vision for their community would be out of control angry if someone tried to tell them what to do with their property or their yard.
We have a local example of that in the last few years. At the same time as we're talking about that, housing mix. I found it interesting that in Governor Cox's Economic Outlook and Public Policy Summit that's been going on for years, he had mentioned this need to address, of course, what we've all heard and probably viewers to the program too about his focus on rural Utah and some of the growth challenges, but that we can't look at the perceived solution the same way that got us into the problem to start. Have there been any of those kind of localized issues, whether it be land use or otherwise, Jim, in Weber County that have motivated people maybe a little bit more than the standard meeting?
I think so. We're dealing with an opportunity to educate right now that has to do with auxiliary dwelling units on people's property.
Another land use. Yeah.
Another land use type things. Or another thing that has to do with the size of, what size should a subdivision lot be? What should that look like? Should they be 1 acre? Should they be 3 acres? Should they be a 1/3 acre? People have different expectations or different thoughts on how their community should grow. And then you can always add affordable housing on top of that. So there are some counties that, like you mentioned earlier about Cache County and how most of the property is there's municipalities or cities. 19 representatives up in Cache Valley. We have 15 here, but we still have a lot of county-owned land that they're not municipalities, and so we're the land use authority for that right now. So getting that balance correctly, but it's the land use or property rights for people and property rights of the people who are already there, and it's
what's interesting about this? It doesn't matter the form of government, right? These subjects, just like you talked about during the regular program, it doesn't matter so much the form per se, as much as the people that you bring in. If they've got problems and they bring them with them, then you're going to probably have problems. If they're great people with great character, you're going to likely do well. These types of issues also don't matter based on the form of government. You're going to have the same challenges. So folks, if there's been a common theme through today's program, and we appreciate you if you stuck around to listen to some of our outtakes and extra in-depth discussion, remember, the key is your involvement. So please, make sure to get to know your city, county, and state leaders that represent you and sit down with them every once in a while. Send them an email, not a form email, but one from the heart, and strike up a good conversation and let them know what it is you'd like to see in your community. Thanks again for watching The County Seat. We hope you enjoyed this extra special segment. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching The County Seat. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications to keep up to date on the program and happenings around Utah.